Hello everyone and welcome to my screencast. This is the story of slavery in America and those who live to tell the tale. The term race refers to groups of people who have differences and similarities in biological traits deemed by society to be socially significant. For instance, while differences and similarities in eye color have not been treated as socially significant, differences and similarities in skin color have. The importance and ramifications of race are factors still not fully appreciated by many Americans. The overriding issue has been slavery. It took the Civil War to end slavery, but the impact of slavery continues to affect America today. Our present concept of race only goes back to the 18th century, such as what we see in Alexander Falconbridge's account on the slave trade, Frederick Douglass's narrative on his life as a slave, and Rosa Parks' initiative to end it all. Alexander Falconbridge was one of the most influential people who worked to end slavery. He was a British surgeon who took part in 4 voyages in slave ships between 1780 and 1787. In time, he became an abolitionist and in 1788 published an account of the slave trade on the coast of Africa. In his work, he states that ancient people were aware of human diversity, but had no notion that people could be scientifically placed in fixed racial categories. He explains how people were more concerned with differences in culture, language, and religion rather than skin color. Frederick Douglass was another influencer who helped to shape the definition of race. He was an African American who escaped slavery in Maryland and eventually became a national leader of the abolitionist movement in Massachusetts and New York. Douglass wrote several autobiographies where he describes his experience as a slave. The narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass was influential in promoting the cause of abolition. I was profoundly saddened in reading his work, in which he details his pain and suffering which he had endured. Frederick Douglass writes how he was separated from his mother shortly after his birth and recalls only seeing his mother on rare occasions. He tells the story of how his mother dies when he was 7 years old and how his father was a white man. He had always suspected that his father was a slave owner and that he would be mistreated more than the average colored child. Walter Johnson's work focuses on the history of slavery, capitalism, white supremacy, black resistance, and U.S. imperialism. Johnson's article, Slavery, begins by saying that there are untold stories because of the unfortunate circumstances surrounding the history of slavery. Johnson also states in his article that slavery is inhumane because it denies people of freedom and of their rights. The history of slavery must therefore be examined. Many argue that the revolution began with Miss Rosa Parks, who decided to sit down where she pleases. When she decided to stay seated, she made a difference in our history. Miss Parks was part of a community of local activists who were organizing to take on segregated buses. By sitting on that bus, she began the civil rights movement, which began to change the definition of race in American history. The 1950s brought upon the civil rights movement. Martin Luther King Jr., Fred Shuttlesworth, and Ralph Abernathy, as seen in this photo, are 3 pivotal leaders of the civil rights movement during the 50s and 60s. They were Baptist ministers who worked to end segregation and achieve unity in society. They wanted everyone to be treated equally. There were other ministers and church leaders who supported them in their work to achieve equality. On April 14, 1960, the ministers who supported the civil rights movement picketed the F.W. Woolworth store in New York in protest of the store's lunch counter segregation at southern branches of its chain. The reason behind the picket was because in 1960, 4 black freshmen from North Carolina Agricultural and Technical College in Greensboro entered the Woolworth store and sat down at the lunch counter. These freshmen were denied service just because of their skin color. The news of this event had spread, and within 2 weeks, demonstrations were held in more than 100 cities in the South and the North. Their commitment led to the desegregation of the F.W. Woolworth lunch counters on July 25, 1960. One of the most influential people during this time was Martin Luther King Jr. He became to be known as the moral leader of the nation. He worked endlessly to ensure that black people would be given the same civil rights whites enjoyed. Martin Luther King Jr. was known for his motivational speeches, where he succeeds in providing hope to the people. King's speech brought the crowd to life with its simple images and repeated phrases. He said his people will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. Martin Luther King Jr. had a desire to have all men treated equally. He successfully changed history using a non-violent approach, which truly made its mark. He showed people that we can come together peacefully and stop the segregation.